drowning, pulling against the stream, pulling against the. My face above the water, my feet can't touch the ground, and it feels like I can see the sands on the horizon every time you are not around. Slowly drifting away, wave after wave, wave after wave. Slowly drifting, and it feels like
So, you make the decisions. You're the one who
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. As David just said, I'm a futurist. So, two things you should know. My job is, I'm based out of Los Angeles, and so I'm actually currently living about 8 hours in the future right now. But also, professionally, I'm meant to live 2 or 3 years in the future and then come back and tell you all about it. And one of the things you might not know is in February next year, PowerPoint is being made a war crime. And so, I don't have any slides. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk to you for about 25 minutes or so to give you sort of the basis of the rest of the morning, give you an idea of what it is that we are talking about in the wider focus. Now, as I say, I work as a consulting futurist. So my job is going into corporations and governments, some militaries around the world, and helping them consider what changes are just about to come down the line, what things they're going to have to deal with in their business models, in their policies, in their strategies for the next few years. Now, that as an industry, that as a field of study has been around since about the 60s, where it was invented by the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, who are literally about 3 miles up the beach from where I live. And when Rand first started to do sort of futurism studies, they worked on a planning horizon, a futurist horizon of about 25 years. The forecast that they were writing in 1960, they were writing for 1985. And around about then, that was a perfectly sensible thing to do. It was perfectly sensible to make 20-year predictions. They made entire sense. Now, those predictions weren't necessarily correct in their entirety. They weren't meant to be. They were meant to be wrong in an interesting way. But nevertheless, it was still seen as perfectly sensible to make a 20-year prediction. Today, though, making a 20-year prediction is utter madness. Completely insane. It's a real problem for me. I started working in this field almost exactly 20 years ago as the internet correspondent for the Times newspaper. And when I started writing for the Times, when we still had to put in the comma clause after the word internet, the internet, comma, the connected network of computers that will soon be a big thing. When I started that job, we could still make predictions which were maybe 10 years out. But today we've realized that any prediction more than about 3 or 4 years out is liable to be utterly wrong. I mean, you only have to think about what's happened in the past decade. For example, so this year is the 10th anniversary of the release of the iPhone. So if you think back 12 years ago, any prediction, literally any prediction that you would have made about the way that the world works today would have been entirely wrong because of the massive transformation that the iPhone and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Snapchat and Instagram and all the other businesses which weren't around 12 years ago. All of the differences that they have made to the world. And so this puts us into something of a bind. If we're going to spend the rest of today talking about business strategies based on new technologies, but the very nature of those new technologies is that they change so rapidly and change the rest of the world so much, why are we even here? Well, to start off with, I want to give you some cognitive tools. I want to give you some ways of thinking about the world which will help you. Not just for the rest of this morning, but hopefully for the rest of the year as well, and perhaps even next year if things don't change too much. Let's first start to think about why it is that the world is changing so quickly. Well, around about the same time as the Rand organization was starting to do their first futurist studies, Gordon Moore, who's the co-founder of Intel, you know, the people who make the microchips, he was writing an article for a magazine in the States where he noticed an interesting pattern in the microchips that they were making. He realized that roughly every year, for a given amount of money, they could fit twice as many components onto one of their integrated circuits. And he wrote about it in an article, like I say, in about 1964, and then it was sort of forgotten. But about 10 years later, his engineers revisited that article, and they realized that the pattern had remained the same, that roughly every year, for a given amount of money, they could fit twice as many components onto one of their chips. This was sort of renamed Moore's Law. And you know it today, if you know it at all, as roughly every year computing power doubles for a given amount of price, for a given amount of money. Or the inverse of that is, for a given amount of computing power, the price halves every year. But Moore's Law isn't the only one of these sorts of guiding principles that guides technology today. There are many others, all named after the person who invented them, talking about every other type of technology, from screen resolution to bandwidth, to the amount of power you can get out of a solar cell, the amount of power you can put into a battery, and so on and so on. And all of these different rules all follow the same pattern, that roughly every year there's a doubling of capability. Now that's exceptionally weird. We've never had a situation before in human history where the capability of our tools has gotten twice as good every year or so. You know, if you think back to the olden days, you know, we didn't have swords that got twice as pointy every year, right? Or horses that got twice as fast every year. But today, all of our digital stuff gets twice as good pretty much every year. Now, why is this? Well, there are many reasons. One of them is that we use digital tools to design the next generation of digital tools. You don't use a sword to make another sword. I mean, you use a horse to make another horse. That's true, right? But, you know, after a while, they stop getting any faster. But digital stuff gets better and better every year. Now, that growth, that doubling and doubling every year, is also itself very strange, because it's an exponential growth. And we as human beings find it very, very difficult to conceive of any form of exponential growth. Going from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64 to 128 to 256 to 512 to 1024 and so on and so on and so on. That curve going up like that is very, very difficult to think about. As an example, like I say, I started working in this field about 20 years ago. And 20 years is a fine period of time in a career to go from right at the beginning of your career to a point of seniority. If you think about the computational power the change that happens over those 20 years, though, it becomes completely insane. The most powerful desktop machine that I could have had on my desk in 1997 compared to the most powerful desktop machine I could have on my desk today, it's about a million-fold increase in computing power. It's literally impossible, it would have been literally impossible in 97 to think about what I could have done on my desktop if I even had a desktop today. What I could do on my desktop today in 97. That increasing capability is just too great. Now this leads us, as business people, as just citizens of the world, into all sorts of areas of incredible stress. The first bit of stress is because our institutions, whether those are physical institutions, governments, businesses, corporations, or mental institutions, just the way we think about how the world works, are based on old systems before we had that exponential growth of capability. The vast majority, especially here in the UK, the vast majority of organizations had their founding and had their sort of adolescence, the way they grew up, the way that they thought about how the world was created, the things that happened to them that shaped them into the organizations they are today, in a pre-digital era. So it's very difficult for us, both as individuals and as companies and as political entities here, to think about how to operate in that digital world. We have an expectation that things will move much more slowly than they do. And because of this, we find that any conversation about digital transformation is almost impossible to have, because the very pace of digital transformation is more than we can think about. And so we need to start to think in a different way Not think about digital transformation as a way of, as an event that happens to a business to take it into the future, but a whole new way of doing business that is much more suited to the present day. Indeed, working as a futurist, one of the problems that I have is that talking about how the world's going to be in 2020 is only really useful if the people you're speaking to live in 2017. But the vast majority of people today don't live in 2017. Most people are actually living in about 2006 and cosplaying 2017. Most organizations aren't really in the present. They're living in the past. So before we start to think about digital transformation, we have to think about just being in the present day. One of the first questions you should ask yourself today before we even move on is, what year am I living in? I fly an awful lot. Like I said earlier, I'm based in Los Angeles and I have clients all the way around the world. And one of the organizing principles of my life is dealing with airlines. And some airlines I can speak to in a modern way. KLM, for example, if I wanted to change my ticket with KLM, I can speak to them through Facebook Messenger, because KLM lives in 2017. And they said, how do our customers talk to each other? On Facebook Messenger. So that's how we can talk to our customers too. But other airlines, one of which I, for example, write a column in their in-flight magazine, they like me to use a fax machine. Which is awesome, because I keep my fax machine next to my carrier pigeons and my smallpox. So let's talk about that. Why is it that many organizations remain sometime in the past? What is it about that just transformational thing? Why is it that some organizations aren't in 2017 and for whom, and those organizations talking about the future is utterly futile in the first place? Why is that? Well, one of the reasons I think is because they make the canonical mistake, the canonical business mistake of the 21st century. It's called the Kodak mistake. And for those of you who've never heard of this is how it went. In 1978, there was an engineer at Kodak who invented the digital camera. And the one he made was about this big. It sat on a podium just like this. And in 1978, he wheeled it into a Kodak board meeting. And he said, behold, it is a digital camera. And they said, that's very interesting. Tell me all about it. And he said, well, it takes one photograph, 0.1 megapixels. That's the resolution of this T-shirt. And it records that one image onto an audio cassette tape. Those of you under the age of 50, you can ask somebody next to you, I'll tell you what that is. It takes about 7 minutes to record the image onto the audio cassette tape. And then when it has done that, you can take it to another machine about the same size. You put the audio cassette tape in, you press it, and over 7 minutes, it shows you the image. And the Kodak board were like, yeah, it's shit, isn't it? I mean, you know, it's an engineering miracle and all that sort of thing, but we make Kodachrome film, which is the most beautiful photographic film in existence, right? It's being used by National Geographic for all of their covers. Paul Simon wrote a song about it. It's the most gorgeous thing ever. And we make millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of exposures worth of this film every year, and we make enormous amounts of money doing it. We employ 36,000 people in Rochester, New Jersey to make this film. It is amazing, and it makes beautiful images. And that is a toy that doesn't really do much. And so they killed it. As a project, they just killed it. And so that was fine, right? That was fine. In the late 70s, that was a perfectly sensible thing to do, and in the early 80s, still perfectly sensible. But they'd forgotten Moore's law. They'd forgotten that every year, digital capability doubles and doubles and doubles. So sure, in the early 80s, totally fine decision. Late 80s, perfectly fine, but the digital camera was getting smaller and was getting better. And by the early 90s, it was still rubbish, but it was getting better. And in '97, in my first year on the Times, I wrote an article which said, digital cameras, are they almost here yet? Question mark. And in '98, I wrote a preview of the first digital cameras to be less than £1,000. And at the time, they took pictures which were like 480 by 360 pixels. Again, rubbish, right? But in '99, I was writing articles like, the 10 digital cameras you'll be taking on a holiday. Skip another few years, 2007, the iPhone comes out, and in the first year of the iPhone's release, more photographs were taken with the iPhone alone than had been taken by humans in all of human history in the previous years. A few years later, this very same week, that Kodak went horribly bankrupt for not having embraced digital photography at all. The very same week, Instagram, which is the app which enables you to take photos that look like old Kodak film, was sold to Facebook for $1 billion, and it had about 10 employees. The 36,000 employees that Kodak had all lost their jobs. So what was the Kodak mistake? Well, their mistake was they saw a new technology coming down the line, and they said, yeah, but it's rubbish. And they forgot that if a digital technology exists, and even the possibility of it disrupting your business exists, even a little bit, it is going to kill you very soon because of that doubling and doubling of capability every year. So, with that Kodak mistake in mind, what can we do about this? What are the ways of thinking that we have to make into a personal habit? What are the ways of thinking that we have to have which will enable us to deal with all of the changes that have already happened, to get ourselves up to 2017 and deal with all of the changes that are going forward? Well, I think one of the most important things to do is start to pay attention to what it is that you do in your own personal lives. Because you'll find if you slow down and you'll pay attention to the way that you operate, your personal life and your business life are very much at odds with each other. What you expect from the world personally and what you expect from the world in your business life, at work, are completely different. Over the past 20 years or so, from the dot-com boom all the way up to today, we have developed, almost instinctually, most of us, an instinctual understanding and expectation of the digital world. Sort of a visceral feel for how digital things operate, which is not necessarily reflected in our working lives. And bringing those things together is the first step. Let me give you an example. Well, the first example is the airlines one. We have an expectation that we'll be able to communicate with everybody we want to communicate with through the methods that we prefer to communicate with people through. He says in the most complex sentence ever. i.e., because I speak with all of my friends on Facebook Messenger, I want to be able to speak to my airlines as well. And so at the same day as I spoke to KLM to change a ticket on Facebook Messenger, I also paid my American Express bill over Facebook Messenger. Because American Express is a very, very modern company, and it enables me to reach out and interact with American Express in the way that I reach out and interact with all of my friends. Because I have an expectation, and they have an expectation that that's how the world works now. In the same way as if you're on your iPhone and you start talking to somebody, and you start texting somebody, and the color doesn't change and doesn't show you that they're on iMessage, you feel that they're a bit weird. Most businesses now, if I can't speak to them, use it over a chat room or over a Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or something like that, I'm starting to realize that they're sometime in the past. So one of the first expectations is that the businesses will come to where I am, not I have to go to them. In the same way as 20 years ago, there was an expectation that businesses had a website. Today, it's utterly unimaginable that you wouldn't have a website. It's just an expectation that we have. The next major expectation is about how data is. We have in our personal lives a visceral understanding of the quality, the physical quality of data. And it came from the way that we interact with our music collections. 20 years ago, the music industry was completely destroyed, utterly transformed, ripped apart and rebuilt because they didn't understand the very nature of data. I spent the first few years of my career reporting on it every single week. The music industry considered that data was like a physical object. That to copy it cost money. That if I give you some data, I no longer have it. You have it and I don't. And so on and so on. All of those physical qualities of a physical thing. And then the MP3 format came out, and Napster happened, and all those things which now seem like another world, generation or two ago. And we as humans in our personal lives started to understand the physical nature of data. Data is free to copy in an infinite number of times, and every time you make a copy of it, it's perfect. If I give you a copy of some data, I still have that data, and you have a copy of it that's absolutely the same. And so on and so on. We started to understand the physical qualities of data. And so, when we interact with organizations whose main job is pushing data around, our expectations of the way that they interact with us is based on our personal experience of interacting with data ourselves. And any company that doesn't follow that intuitive sense of how data is immediately seems weird. This is the case if you're a customer, and it's also the case if you're an employee. Well, later on, people will be speaking about working from home, working remotely. And this is exactly the same thing. If my job is playing with data, if my job is taking some data, doing something to it and pushing it on, then my job can be done from anywhere. Because that's how data is. It doesn't matter where I am. The internet doesn't care where I am. So why should my employer? Why should my business? And if the only answer to that question is because that's the way we've always done it, then your digital transformation process hasn't even started because you're not even in 2017. At the same time, with that doubling and doubling and doubling of capability, with that exponential growth of possibilities, every so often we reach a step change in what is possible. Roughly every 10 years or so, we have a leveling up of technologies where suddenly a whole lot more stuff is available. 10 years ago, it was the smartphone with all of those radical transformations. Today, 2017, we are right on the cusp of a new leveling up. Computational power that's available today has become so good that we're starting to see, right now, the beginnings of consumer-grade, cheap enough artificial intelligence. This Christmas, if you haven't already got one, you're probably going to get yourself an Amazon Echo. More than likely. Sorry for the spoiler, but you're all probably going to get one. And the Amazon Echo, if you haven't got one already, is a general purpose artificial intelligence. I have 4 of them because I'm like that, but the one that I use the most is in my kitchen. And you've all seen it, or seen it on TV, or played with somebody's, right? You go up to it, you stand near it, and you say, "Hey, Alexa," and the blue light comes on, you can talk to it. And you can get it to do lots of things. Order things from Amazon, find out what the news is, find out what the weather is, find out what the cricket score is, all of those different things. A general purpose artificial intelligence. Works really well in the home. But what we're realizing is, for a good deal of businesses, the vast majority of their business is just moving data around. It's just taking some data, doing something to it, and pushing it on. And as these devices get smarter and smarter, we're realizing that a lot of those tasks of taking some data, doing something to it, and pushing it on, can be done by these newly smart, newly artificially intelligent devices. Now, if you read a lot of the scary press of the past few months, you might be worrying that when we meet here again next year, half of you will be replaced by small black cylinders sat on the desk. Depending on the industrial sector that you're in, that may or may not be true. There are some industries, absolutely, where we're realizing through big data analysis and so on, that the humans don't really add any value. I do an awful lot of work with financial services companies. Are there any fund managers in here today? Okay, good. Fund managers are totally screwed, right? Because a fund manager, all a fund manager does is take some data, look at it and go, and then pushes it on. And we're realizing that software can do that job. Do the entirety of that job. There's nothing in a fund manager's job that can't be done by software. And so fund managers are all going away. They're being replaced by software. And there are a few other jobs. There are a few other small categories of jobs where literally everything they do can be done by software. Insurance underwriters, a lot of solicitors, like house sales and things like that, right? Mostly can be done by software, or almost entirely can be done by software. And so those jobs are going away. But for the rest of us, there are vast swathes of tasks, specific tasks that you do during your working day that can be done by software, interconnected software. And so that's the next big challenge that we face. That every single person in this room is going to do something today in their working lives or personal lives which really should be done by software. Where the opportunity is to take that task and give it to a machine to do. Some of you will have that thrust upon you by the market, by your boss, by the shareholders, whatever. But some of you will get to choose which bits of your jobs you want to liberate and give to the machines. This is a massive cultural change that is about to happen. We'll be speaking a lot about this later on. But before we get to that, before we get to the questions, let me give you the cognitive tool that you're going to need over the next few years. As I said, most organizations aren't living even in the present. But once you've got yourself up to the present, once you've got yourself into 2017, how do you work your way into the future? Well, digital transformation is not a single event. It is not something that you just do that gets you into the future. Instead, digital transformation is a constant practice, something that you have to be doing all of the time. And so how do you do that? Well, this is how. It's called constant legacy-free reinvention. You have to have a long name. Constant legacy-free reinvention works like this. Every single time, every day, not every day, because it's too tiring. Let's choose a couple of days every month, right? A couple of days every month, go about your entire working day and very mindfully think about everything you're doing. Take every single task that you're doing and think, if I was doing this task, if I was solving this problem, because every work task is solving a problem, if I was solving this problem for the first time today, how would I do it? What technologies would I use? What techniques would I use? What systems would I use? What colleagues would I bring in? What third parties would I employ? How would I do this if I was doing this for the first time? And I guarantee you, because I've run this exercise in many organizations around the world, in many different cultures of many different types of organization, every time you run this exercise, what you find is that pretty much everything you do could be done in a different and more modern way. It's incredibly upsetting when you do it for the first time. It's like going through your sock drawer and finding holes in every single one of your socks. But that's great, because it gives you an excuse to go onto Amazon and just buy new socks. And then when you have new socks, and you feel much happier when you have new socks. And this is the same thing. It's a terrible metaphor. I wish I'd not gone that way. If you look at every single problem that you're trying to solve as if you're solving it for the first time, that will enable you to stay not in the future, but stay in the present. We live in a world which is changing too quickly, too unpredictably, too strangely for us to try to get ahead of everything. It's impossible to do so. It's a waste of time. But instead, your challenge today is to try and stay at the forefront of change, to stay right on the edge. And the only way to do that is to constantly and consistently reassess everything you do in your organizations using modern tools and modern techniques, and asking yourself the question, if I was doing this for the first time today, how would I do it? If you ask that question truthfully about everything you do, that will bring you into a position in which change is a natural and constantly occurring transformational process. And you and your businesses will grow naturally and happily without the shock that Kodak felt when their entire business went away in less than a couple of years. David.
Thank you very much, Ben. So as if to illustrate the Kodak moment, hello to everyone who's on Facebook and YouTube, I think, who's watching this in your offices, at home, on the bus, on the loo, wherever. Hello, thank you very much for joining us. So, Ben, I want to go all the way back to the beginning again. And the common sort of three-word mantra that gets bandied about in these conversations, it's about people, processes, and technology, right?
Right.
I want to talk about the people. You talked about Moore's Law and about how, as a futurist, you try and live a few years in the future. But also, we need to have an eye back to the past. So smartphones, 20 years ago. Let's go back 10 years before the iPhone. If I'd have stood on stage as a 18, 19-year-old, 12-year-old, thank you, and said, in the very near future, we will have a little bit of glass in our pockets that gives us instant access to the world's knowledge. And I'd have asked people in the audience to say, what does that mean? How will society be that much a better place when we've got everything right here, instant access to it? We'd have gone on about, the end of poverty, all kinds of amazing things. Here we are, 10 years into the smartphone revolution, and we've got Pokemon Go, we've got Tinder, we've got Twitter and Instagram and so on. And not that they're all bad things, but it does seem to me as though, and to your point, that humans have struggled with this exponential growth in power. And it's as though the human computation, whether it's in businesses or as individuals, isn't necessarily able to keep up and take full advantage of the technology innovation. Your thoughts on that? Sorry to chuck you a hospital pass there.
No, I mean, yes. Unless, of course, you're not a middle-aged white dude sat in the base of the BT Tower, right? I mean, whilst it's true that we can say, well, we all have supercomputers in our pocket, and we're just using it to play Angry Birds or Pokemon Go. Sure, that's true, but at the same time, having all of the advantages, all of the facilities that the smartphone has brought us, has enabled enormous amounts of change in other places. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the techniques that I like to use a lot with a lot of my clients is just to take them outside, right? And that doesn't have to be to another country or another culture. It can literally just be to the other side of the city. Mm-hmm. here in London, that, for example, I could take, we could all go and get on a bus right now and go out to Shoreditch, which is the cliched one, but we could go to, Acton and go and talk to 12-year-old kids about their relationship with technology. And they live in a completely different world to everybody in this room.
Yeah.
They see the world completely differently because of the capabilities that we have that are native to them. We talk about digital natives, and a digital native, or millennials and things like that, and especially in the UK culture, it's a derogatory term, right? It's that whole thing it's that whole British habit of saying, oh, I don't know how to program my video, I let my kid do it, which is a sort of a belittling thing about technology. But actually, the transformation that these technologies have brought about, pretty much every aspect of every aspect of life, really cannot be overstated.
They're relatively incremental gains, and you almost need to take a step back to understand the journey that we've been on, even in the life of the smartphone.
They're not relatively incremental gains at all. It's just that they've become so natural, they become so naturalized in our experience that they seem to be banal. But if you think of if you think of all of the interactions that everybody has had today using a smartphone, for example, that has unlocked a business model which would have been utterly impossible, whether we're talking about GPS and Google Maps or Citymapper, or whether it's ordering not an Uber here anymore, but whether it's ordering a cab,
just still,
or whether it's checking the news, checking the test match score as you're walking down the street, or whether it's sitting at breakfast this morning and ordering Christmas presents, and sending pictures and showing pictures around the world, and listening to the news in Los Angeles, and booking an airline ticket, and booking a hotel room, and just relatively simple stuff that I did this morning whilst drinking a coffee in a cafe around the corner, right? Completely transformed the world. And so, but these things are so much part of the present day that they've become banal almost.
Yep.
And that hides something. That really hides the transformation, the utter transformation that's happened. Because we look at these technologies and we go, it's just using a supercomputer to access a satellite to tell me where I am on the planet within 3 feet, and then use an artificial intelligence to plot a route between here and the place I'm going to that takes into account all of the real-time traffic sensor data that's embedded in the roads, and also its prior knowledge of all of the traffic patterns over the past 10 years, and those are these same streets in this type of weather and this type of time of day, and all that sort of stuff, to enable me to get to my next appointment on time. Mm. Well, yeah, of course. That's on the one hand, that's just using Google Maps. On the other hand, it's a fucking miracle, right? and so I think we have to. We would actually be well served to every so often look at these things and go, these things are amazing.
Yep.
These things are they're magical devices. We are like wizards when we use this stuff. Cool. Let's see if we can use some of the same magic in everything else we do in our lives.
So to your point about, I guess, the blank sheet of paper principle about this, if we were to start off from today doing this thing that we do or want to carry on doing, how would we do it? Would we do it how we do it now, or is there a better way with this amazing wizardry that we have access to? Big organizations often find it very difficult to do that, so they claim, which is coming to where you live now, on the west coast of America. Mm-hmm. There's a very rich ecosystem of startups who disrupt things and do all of that, and they then, many of them hope to get bought up by those big companies because those big companies find it difficult to innovate from within.
Right.
So do you have any advice for people who are here, who maybe work for big companies, who might be finding it, who might struggle to even know where to begin within their large organization to go with this blank sheet of paper thinking you're talking about?
Because I think the most important thing is to not start at that sort of scale. If you're going to start disrupting stuff or innovating, you shouldn't be looking at first, let's invent Facebook. Instead, you should be looking at, first, how do I order coffee in the morning, right? When I talk about how do I solve this problem, how can we do this with modern technology, I'm not talking about, let's create an R&D department, or let's buy some office space in Shoreditch and fill it full of bean bags and people in hoodies and hope that they make something cool. Because A, that never works for many reasons, but B, that's too great a jump. What instead you want to be doing, when I talk about what am I, reinventing everything, is literally, you buy a coffee on the way to work. So I did this the other day, right? I cycle my daughter to school. I drop my daughter off at her school, and then I cycle to the gym. And I want to get a coffee. And there's a Starbucks just around the corner for the gym that I go to, and so I go to the Starbucks and I queue up in the Starbucks and I get my coffee. And then I realized, because I was sort of going through this process in my head, that the Starbucks app allows you to pre-order. And so as I'm cycling now, as of last week, as I'm cycling down Main Street in Santa Monica, which has got a nice cycle lane in it, so it's perfectly sensible, I'm on my phone and I pre-order my coffee so that when I park up in front of the Starbucks, the coffee is there waiting for me. That has, to use the term, disrupted my coffee purchasing experience, right? But on the one hand, that's massively overblowing it. But on the other hand, yeah, no, it totally has, actually, because it saves me about 10 minutes a day, which is kind of useful. It's actively, it's a joyful thing to do. It's kind of cool to walk in and go, coffee for Ben, thank you very much, and walk out again, right? I don't have to have money in my pocket and all that sort of stuff because my phone is preloaded with cash and all that sort of thing. It's actively made my life better. And if you can do that to 2 or 3 things you do a day, once a month, after a year, you have transformed your life. And not only have you transformed your life, but you transformed your life in a way where every transformation is using and learning from the latest technologies and the latest techniques. And so it's that incremental at every step sort of improvement that is the way that I think that you have to operate. The alternative is to do the old-fashioned way of thinking about the future. So there are 2 ways of writing science fiction. There's the incremental change version of the future in science fiction, which is the future is just like today, only with this thin layer of stuff over the top. So Blade Runner is a good example of that. If you watch the original film of Blade Runner, the sets, when Ridley Scott made the sets, they first made a 1970s city, and then they layered stuff on top of it until they got to whenever it was meant to be set, right? To give it this sort of feeling of the future. Or you can have like the Dome City future, right? Which is like Star Trek, where everything, we're in this pristine city and everybody's in paper clothes and they're eating pill food, right? The pristine future will never exist. That's not a thing. The future is always going to consist of the past with layers and layers of stuff on top of it, right? In the same way as London is at the same time an incredibly futuristic city and an incredibly old-fashioned ancient city at the same time, right? I mean, BT Tower, for example, what is it, 50 years old?
Something like that.
Something like that, right? It's both futury and old at the same time, right? And so, depending on which floor you're on, it's both at the same time, right? And so that's how our lives are going to be. So we have to, and how your business is going to be. There are going to be some processes in your business which are absolutely brand new, and there are some processes in your business which are going to be absolutely ancient. And you're always going to have a mixture of that sort of stuff. So you have to, the only way you can get ahead is not to go, right, from April the 1st next year, we are going to be living in the future. Instead, you're going to be like, okay, from tomorrow, we're going to make this thing and this thing better. And then the day after that, we're going to make this thing better. And currently, we file our expenses by stapling receipts to a piece of paper and putting them in a brown envelope and sending it in the internal mail. But from next week, we're going to have a web interface, or we're going to have a smartphone app, and we're going to take pictures of the receipts, and then we're going to shred them, and they're going to get submitted, and so on and so on and so on. And if you do that stepwise change, you end up far further ahead than you would be if you're waiting around for the grand digital transformational moment.
And the challenge is, as humans, as organisations, sometimes we get a little bit lazy and we get into our routine and we don't innovate and we don't look at those simple things that, when you combine them, particularly throughout a large organisation, ripple out and can have a huge effect over a longer period of time.
Right. So much innovation culture. And earlier I talked about the Shoreditch office with the bean bags and the guys with the hoodies in it. This is a good example of that. So much innovation culture is actually based around trying to prevent innovation, or trying to exile it, trying to ghetto it away, right? If you have an organization, and I apologize if any of you have this, right? But if any of you have an organization where there is a like experimental unit, like an R&D unit, usually in Shoreditch with the bean bags and guys in hoodies, and they're the people over there, it'll be called something like Innovation Lab or something like that. If you have one of those, that is almost by definition a sign that your company is making a horrible, horrible mistake. Because it's a way of making sure innovation doesn't touch the rest of the business. Mm-hmm. And so it's used for two things. It's used to, one, get the mouthy executive out of the main building. Right? So you've got somebody who's going, we should be using the internet, and they're like, yeah, get rid of him, put him in over there, right? And it's a way of getting some press, because all of these, you and I have been to many of these launches, right? Where the CEO comes in. This is how it goes. You have a building, you have bean bags, you have a coffee machine, they'll have a fridge full of fizzy drinks, and they'll be like, this is free food, we're like Google, right? And then the CEO will come in, and there'll be a press thing, and the CEO will make a speech talking about how they're really talking about the future, and you can tell that they're into the future because he's taken his tie off, and you see, I noticed like very few ties in the office, right? And so, but really, what it is it's a way of ghettoizing innovation.
So bring these R&D labs, these innovation labs, bring them in-house, make them part of...
No, it should be part of the culture, right? If your business isn't if every part of your business isn't constantly looking to change the way it does that business, then it has stopped dead in the water. And as I started off by saying, the dominant pattern of the 21st century is one of exponential change, right? So if you are not even moving forward a little bit, you are going backwards compared to everybody else.
Moore's law thinking. Listen, I wish we had more time to discuss on this. However, we are out of that. But we will have more later on. Listen, if Ben's conversation just now has provoked you, then please do pop some questions through using the Slido tool that we looked at earlier on. But for now, please give a warm round of applause for Ben Hammersley.
Williams has had a wonderful history of success. We've won 16 World Championships and taken 114 Grand Prix victories.
Everything we're doing is to win. I'm not interested to be here just to participate.
The connectivity that BT
There we are, stirring film. Please welcome to the stage one of the faces that we saw in the film, Mr. Graham Hackland. Thank you very much, Graham. Now, first things first, Graham came to me with a bit of information a few moments ago. Ben and I were on stage a few moments earlier on this morning asking the question, how old is the BT Tower? Now, Graham, using this connectivity device
modern
with
technology,
instant access to the entirety of the world's knowledge, he found at BT Tower London, apologies if that's not an official BT account, but he says, in the description of the Twitter account, hello, I'm the BT Tower, I'm really tall, I'm a really tall 52-year-old male.
There you go.
So 52 years old and 189 metres according to this unverified Twitter account. But I think that gets us pretty much in the zone. Anyway, back to big racing cars, as we can see over your head there, Graham. Like I say, a very stirring video. I'm a kind of motorsports fan. I guess you'd call me a motorsports flirt. I watch the Formula One if I can when it's on.
I'll convert you eventually. We're getting
Yeah,
there.
you are. Now, for the audience here, every couple of weeks or so, we see a couple of Williams cars, usually a couple, depending on how long they last, racing around a track in some far-flung part of the world, going as fast as they can, risking life and limb and tyre in order to try and come on the podium. There's a lot more to it than that, I guess you're going to tell me. So let's talk about what, from a technology point of view, and obviously touching on what your relationship is with BT, what's behind the tyres of Williams F1?
So we're being live streamed, so I can't be rude back. So I'll let you get away with that one for now. It's been a tough season for us. We have 800 people at Williams, 600 or so working in Formula One, and the rest are working in our advanced engineering company, where we're taking the knowledge and know-how we have in Formula One, lightweight materials, aerodynamics, energy efficiency and performance, and applying it to all sorts of other industries. And it's a fascinating part of our business and what we do. And we have about 60% of our workforce who work regularly away from our base. So a lot of the conversations that have happened this morning absolutely resonate with us. It's no longer the case that you tether someone to a desk, that they clock in and out, and only when they're clocked in or are they productive. And so we've had to really change the technology stack, but also how people work in order to get, we heard lots about productivity this morning, how to get the best out of them, how to improve that car. And when you have a bad season and you don't perform at the level that you hope to, as we have this year, the great thing about sports, and I work with other sporting CIOs, and we have a round table and we regularly get together. The great thing about sports is your season always ends and you get to forget that season, and we're about to do that this weekend in Abu Dhabi. You forget that season and you get to do it all again. And for us next year, a lot of opportunity to really make up that differential that we've had this year, where we haven't performed at the level that we've wanted to. Being fifth is not where Williams want to be. In the next few years, we want to be at the top of the championship, winning races. And it's all about incrementally improving everywhere. So some of the things that Ben talked about this morning I really liked, because we've been talking about digital transformation, and BT came in and partnered with us in 2015 to help accelerate that digital transformation. I'm going to stop using the word transformation next year, because I think we've got to the point now where we've created a digital workplace for people that they can work. And this year for the first time, and I can show you how far it's gone for us. This year for the first time, CAD designers, and CAD is often a very difficult thing to let people work remotely on because it's very intensive, high graphics. This year for the first time, our CAD designers, during this really busy period, and for the next 3 months, they are going to be 6-7 days a week, crazy hours. I won't say the number because, again, we're being live streamed and it's probably against health and safety. Crazy hours that they're doing. We're now enabling them to work remotely from the factory, so they don't have to drive in and be tethered to their desk. They can start to work on their workloads. And we've been doing it for the race team for a number of years now. And what we've required is the network. The guys talked about it this morning. It's never the most glamorous thing to talk about, but that network needs to be there. It needs to be high performing. It needs to be available. So whether we're flowing data from a car back to the UK or into the cloud so that we can do workloads, or to somebody's home. We even had someone working from a beach somewhere. So we've got to that point now where our engineers can work from anywhere. And we're starting to push the boundaries of that. So now our designers can work from anywhere and securely. We've had some conversations this morning about security and protecting the data. And it's not so much anymore about protecting individual devices. I think we're almost at the point where I'm comfortable with that. It's more about the data itself, protecting the data.
Sure. Okay, well, let's touch on a couple of those points. So since 2015, Williams has been working with BT, and we're talking about all of this digital transformation. It's been around for an awfully long time. Within the time frame that we're talking about, 2015, 16, 17, and obviously you're already planning 2018, 19, what's changed in that short period of time in terms of what BT's enabled you to do, but also in terms of the overall trends, in terms of the expectations from your workers and also the rest of the industry?
So unfortunately for the BT people in the room, I prefer to talk about the impact on people rather than the technology itself, right? So yes, we've put a load of technology in there that helps us, and BT have been brilliant at helping us that. But what we've actually been focused on is changing the lives of our engineers and our people. We had data being generated that our engineers couldn't get to in real time. Yeah. And when you talk about the technology and how we constrained them and how we made it difficult, sometimes in the name of security, but often just we didn't have the technology stack in place that allowed that high performance access to data and applications no matter where they were. And that's the step that BT have helped us to make, that no matter where you are as a Williams employee, you can work as if you were sitting at your desk. And that's what we were aiming for. How do we make the lives of our engineers and designers better? And so we've been really focused on usability. We've had to care about security, of course. We've had to care about the data, the intellectual property. We're working on electric vehicle technology that's right at the cutting edge of what's going on globally. We want to make sure that we're protecting that intellectual property. So beyond Formula One, there's a whole load of things we're doing that is quite different. Formula One data is valuable for a couple of years. No one cares about the 2013 car now. probably even 2014, no one's going to be looking at that data. But when you start to work on systems that are put in hospitals or in road cars and electric batteries that you attach into a car, or battery technology that we're putting in houses with solar panels, and those things, then that intellectual property is really valuable, and understanding the supply chain and how it was made and what it was made from, and if something goes wrong, how you deal with it. Protecting that data, making sure it's never tampered with, that's really important, and that's where we've leaned on BT to help us with their expertise in things that they've done with the Olympics and in government and protecting national critical infrastructure. It makes it really easy for them to help a team like us.
Well, let's talk about another thing you touched on a moment ago in terms of security, and with many more touch points, with more devices that you've got, and obviously your cars are pretty well connected as well, and with many more workers working from distributed locations and from the beach, that also increases your potential attack surface. So what kind of things are you doing in your position as CTO now?
CIO.
CIO, to try and minimize the risk of bad guys getting into your network, stealing your data, or modifying that data?
So there's quite a lot of things we're doing, because I don't think there's any. It's not just about malware protection or protecting the boundary or locking down the devices so that people can only go to use it for corporate applications. And we're trying to, as much as possible, our culture is pretty open. We want people to be able to work wherever they are, but we also want them to be able to have a life wherever they are as well. We expect a lot from our people, so locking them down so they can only do business things on business provided endpoints is just, it's a nonsense. So as much as possible, we're trying to protect the data, trust and verify, so being able to see where the data is, proving to Formula One and to our customers that their data is safe and secure with us. We know where it is, it hasn't been tampered with, it's on encrypted devices, all the things that we're all doing. Every CIO I talk to is moving along this. I think we've got that base now in a good place, and we've had a hack attempt recently on our cloud estate, and it's then how you handle that, how you cope with it, and we're a partly publicly listed company, so we have a board of directors that I need to keep informed on the risk landscape and how it's constantly changing, and what we're doing about it and prioritizing it, because we've got 20 people in IT, 3 of whom have risk and security as part of their role. So for smaller companies, there isn't these big teams of people that are managing all the risks. So that's also where we rely on our partners. We're relying on the security team at BT to tell us about the risks that are out there, and work within our ecosystem of other security partners. I often talk about the onion, which is an old analogy. We've built layers of security to make sure that even if people get through those first couple of layers, ultimately the very valuable stuff in the middle gets protected.
Okay. So we're talking about next generation of working today. As the CIO now at Williams, how do you make sure that you are in touch with the rest of your 800 or so staff there, from people who work in marketing to the people who work in engineering to the drivers? I don't know. How do you make sure that you're across the whole company and not just sat in your ivory tower somewhere in Oxfordshire?
It is one of the most tricky things for CIOs is getting out there and not sitting in your office. So I make a point every single day to get out my office and talk to a member of the executive, to part of the management team, and all the way through the organization, and talk to them about what their challenges are. Where is IT good? That often tends to be a short conversation. Where are we not good? That tends to be a much longer conversation. No matter how good we make it, it's never good enough, which is fine. I mean, that's what keeps us excited about being in IT and the new technologies that are coming. So yeah, get out there into the organization every single day and talk to people about what their challenges are, because we've got a limited resource, and we want to spend our resource on the things that will make the car quicker. That's the most important thing. Yeah. 2018 season, how can we make sure that our car is going to be quick? And we talk to our engineers, what are the challenges? What data can't you get to? Where are your constraints? And our role within IT is to remove those constraints as much as possible, not add to them.
So casting our mind forwards, you're talking about 2018 already, but maybe just with a little bit of a further outlook, some of the outlooks that Ben's talking about.
Ben said 3 to 4 years. Beyond that, only a fool would go, so I'm not going to go beyond 4 years.
Okay. What's the next big thing for you? what technology, given that we're in a room full of technologists and it's ostensibly a technology conversation and that is your role, what technologies do you see as having the biggest difference? What's going to change direction, I guess?
There are a number of big technology areas that we're tracking, some that have gone through the hype cycle and are in that trough of disillusionment at the moment, and I do believe they'll come out, like 3D printing, and I think we'll get to the point where digital manufacturing at the track will be possible. So we won't have to be shipping things to Abu Dhabi this weekend from the UK. We'll be able to make things at the track. But that I think is going to take a little bit of time. The thing that genuinely I think excites us is around artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence, as people are starting to talk about AI. I think the initial step will probably be to get better data to our engineers in real time, that they can make better decisions more frequently. And then eventually, don't tell them this, remove some of them out of the decision-making process and call a pit stop where no human has been involved in that decision-making. And I think the data is there already. The technology is getting there. I think we could probably do it soon. I think the humans will hold us back a bit for a little while. But AI throughout the whole life cycle of our car, we think that whether machine learning, artificial intelligence, how far we go down that road, we'll see what happens. But in the whole design, manufacturing, running aerodynamics, getting to the race team. The race team is the easy part to understand. There's a lot of data coming in, and you've got 15, 20, 30 seconds to make a decision. So there's a lot of momentum around bringing in systems that will make that computation quicker. Back in the factory, we have a Factory of the Future project, and a lot of that is looking at how we automate that decision-making process between aerodynamics, design, manufacturing, so that we can get things onto the car 2 races quicker, 3 races quicker, half a season quicker than we're doing now. So we think that's a really exciting area for us to exploit.
Sure. Before we wrap up on this bit of the conversation, Graham, obviously you're coming from a racing background, a high-performance cars background. I'm not sure how many other people represents the Formula One or the engineering industry in here, but given the lessons that you've learnt over the last 4 or 5 years working with Williams, are there any particular lessons that you think have applications to broader industry, to other public or private sector lines of business?
The biggest challenge we all face, and every CIO I talk to, is not so much the technology, because the technology is great, we all love it, we play with it, we do pilots, we implement it, some stuff is really good and gets implemented quickly. It's like a Formula One car. On a Friday, you put things on the car, if it succeeds, you leave it on for the weekend, if it doesn't, you take it off. And we've got into that mold of working really agile. What we haven't always done is listen to our user base about what is it that they want and be really focused on that customer experience, that user experience, and the whole change management piece. We've been very focused on making sure that we're not pushing technology or projects out into our user force, that they're driving it. They make the decision making on what's being prioritized, what they want first, what technology gets put in. We're not pushing it from an IT perspective. It's them driving from us what they want. And I always say to people, that's the most important thing. If you're pushing technology out there that's going to take them 10 days to learn, there's a 10-day training course, you've lost the battle already. So we've been really focused on things that are intuitive to use and that our users really want.
Sure, and we're going to be touching on that point in terms of drivers of change and drivers of technology in a few moments' time. But for now, Graham, thank you very much. Please show your appreciation for Graham Hagland. I'm going to ask Graham to stay here, and we're going to do a little bit of furniture moving while we bring the chairs on stage for the panel session. But while we do that, to distract from chain lifting chairs, we asked you to do a poll earlier on, just before we went for a break. Could we have the results for that, the Slido poll back?